Don't you? Yeah. What do you wonder? What do you wonder? I have a cousin that is 100 years old. He farmed south of Roscoe his whole life, and I wonder, what has he wondered about through the years? So he's been alive from Woodrow Wilson, President Woodrow Wilson, to our current president. That is a span of years, and I think through the seasons of his life, what has he wondered about? What are some of the things that you wonder about? And different seasons bring different wonders, and sometimes we figure some things out and we don't really wonder about that anymore, but then there's other things that we do wonder about, and it just brings the question, what do you wonder? And what do we wonder? And what's amazing about the human race is we have the capacity to wonder. You ever thought about that? You ever thought that's amazing? And as a Jesus follower, I feel like, man, God created us that way. Maybe you're here today and you're not a Jesus follower. You don't necessarily believe in the Bible. You just happen to find something on YouTube and you're with us, or maybe you're in-house and you got drug here and church isn't really your thing. But however you get there, the ability to wonder, to think about things, to think into the future it's really a phenomenal thing. And see, we wonder because our frame of reference doesn't provide us with all of the answers. See, we look at life through different lenses, and depending on what those lenses are, it helps us know what we think about and what we believe, and we all look through a different frame of reference but it doesn't provide us with all the answers, does it? I mean, no matter how clear we think our frame of reference might be, or how clear we think the lens is that we look through, it doesn't provide us with all of the answers. But that lens that we look through, it helps us to make sense out of life, doesn't it? And maybe you're in a place where it's like, man, life doesn't make any sense at all, and you're wondering if the frame that you're looking through, the lens you're looking through, is the correct lens. And so maybe that's why you're here. Maybe that's why you're tuning in online, and we're so glad that you did. See, if you're like me, you got your frame of reference from religion. See, I grew up in a very, I got to tell you the story. See, I actually, when I was a kid, I was on the bus one time with another kid, and he told me that we were really religious. Now, I didn't really know what religious meant at that time. I thought that was a bad word, so I told him, no, we're not. We are not religious. And so, most people, think religious, that means you go to church a lot, And so in that terms, yes, we were really religious when I was growing up. But I would tell you, today I'm not religious really at all. But that's a longer conversation. But the frame or the lens that you look through, it might be a religious lens. Maybe you grew up and you went to church all the time. Every time it was open, you were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, prayer deal, serving all over the place. And that's the frame of reference that you look at life through. It's through a religious lens. Maybe some of you grew up in kind of a religious. You believed in God, and you would say that we were, yes, I'm Christian, but you only went Christmas and Easter. You only went twice a year. And in terms of how you were, supposed to behave, you didn't really look through necessarily a religious lens. It was just don't get caught, right? Yes, so you had kind of one foot in the world and one foot in church just in case. So I can play it both ways. Maybe that's how you grew up in the frame that you look at. Some of you look at life through a very academic, very intellectual lens. Some of you look at it through a very scientific lens, and if you can't make sense of it mathematically, if you can't make sense of it scientifically, then then you just kind of dismiss it, and it's like, no, that's hogwash, and I can't go there. And some of you grew up in a moralistic background, like just behave, or don't get caught. So make people perceive that you are a very upright, moral person, and have that image, whether that's true behind the scenes or not. That's the one that you want to project. Some of you, you look at life through an opportunistic lens. I mean, you only live once. You do you. You know what? And so you make sure that you take care of number one first. You just take care of yourself, and if that knocks someone else out, well, too bad for them. You only get one trip around this planet. So I'm going to look through life through that lens. Some of you look at it from a karma standpoint. Things happen for a reason. And that person that you're really kind of jealous of, and you've been rooting that they would fail, when they fail, you're like, karma, right? And you're thinking, oh, that's great. Some of you look through fate. Things happen for no reason. Like it's just random, and there's no reason for anything. And you look at that lens, and based on the lens that you look through, the framework that you see life through, it frames what you believe, right? It determines what you believe about God. It determines what you believe about yourself. It determines what you believe about others. It frames everything that you believe about life, and consequently how you should behave, and certainly how others should behave, and how you should behave, even though you don't live up to your own expectations, right? But it does frame how you should behave. And it also frames the level of hope that you have. Some of you look through a lens that doesn't give you a whole lot of hope in this life. And some of you look through a lens that's like, man, there's all kinds of hope in this life. It's so interesting, depending on what lens you look through, how it affects every single part of our life. And see, as children, we may have adopted our parents' lens that they looked through, no matter what that was. And if it was a religious lens, I see this happen all the time. Or especially a somewhat religious lens. So if you were Christmas, Easter, grew up in that family, and it was just kind of peripheral things, but you didn't really take it too seriously. As adults, sometimes we adopt what our parents' lens is, and how they see the world, and how they have taught you to see it the way that they see it, and sometimes we just adopt it. I've adopted my parents' view, the lens that they look through. I adopted that for myself, and I think it's a great lens to look through. But so some of you adopted it. Some of you have adapted it, and I would say I have adapted it. It's not the same as when I was growing up. It's a little bit different. But that lens, sometimes we take it and we adapt it a little bit. And some of you just abandoned it altogether, didn't you? You're just like, I'm out. And it could have been, an academic lens where you're just like, they didn't have any faith at all. Maybe you abandoned that. You're like, no. I'm becoming a person of faith. Maybe you were a person of, grew up in a home where faith was a big deal, and then it became inconvenient, right? Because you got to college, and everyone at college was having, they're partying, having a good time, and it was kind of in conflict with the lens that you kind of look through. And so at first, you may have kind of defended it, even though in the background you were questioning it. And then you said, man, I'm going to go out and have a little bit of fun. But then you felt guilty for having the fun. And you're like, man, I don't really like that. And so you're thinking, what are my options? You think, oh, I know. I'm just going to get rid of that lens. I'm not going to look through that lens anymore. right? I'm not going to look at life through that lens anymore, because that way I can go do whatever it is I want to do. And you know what? I won't have any repercussions from it. I won't have any guilt from it. And I can just kind of live however I want. So I abandon it. Some of you are thinking about abandoning it, aren't you? I mean, life might be beating you up a little bit, and you're thinking, I think you're one circumstance away from walking away from faith. Some of you are thinking about returning. You abandoned it maybe in college, maybe it was a time, dramatic time in your life, and you abandoned it. You walked away, and you're kind of looking at coming back in. See, what you need to know is if you're in a place where you have abandoned it, or you're thinking about abandoning it, whenever we abandon, our frame of reference, it leads to new wonder, and new wonder oftentimes leads us to wander. See, when you were in college and you did away with that frame of reference because it wasn't convenient to what you wanted to do, it led you then to wander, didn't it? It always does. And here's what you need to know about wandering. We don't typically wander in good directions. You ever notice that? We just don't typically wander into very good things that are healthy things for us. So as we move towards the celebration of Jesus' birth, I want to make a case for keeping Jesus in. If you're thinking about walking away, if you're thinking about abandoning, if you're thinking, this just isn't worth it, but I want to make a case for keeping Jesus in, or putting him in for the very first time. Maybe you're here this morning, maybe you're watching online, and you have never put Jesus first in your life. You have never asked him for forgiveness of sin. You have never made him the frame of reference for you. And I would hope that, as we talk about this through this series, that maybe for the first time, you would make him the frame of reference for you, or returning to him. If you're at a place where it was maybe that way, maybe you just had a childlike faith, but it never really grew into adulthood, and so that adult faith, that childhood faith doesn't work in an adult world, and so you just kind of abandon it. I hope that as we talk about things, that you would return Jesus to that frame of reference for you. And you might say, Eric, yeah, that's great and all, but here's the thing. See, if I was going to do that, I feel like the price of admission or readmission is too high. It's too high, because see, it's going to cost me my mind. It's going to cost me my mind. Maybe you look at things through a very academic lens, an intellectual lens. Maybe you're like, it just doesn't add up. Maybe you feel like Christianity is asking people to have faith in faith. To not actually have reason. Like, you got to set aside reason. You got to set aside evidence. You got to set aside fact. You got to set aside all of that if you're going to actually be a Jesus follower. And yet, in the first century, what's so amazing about the Christmas story and the whole first century is, see, the assumption is Christianity requires faith that leaves reason and experience behind. But the original version wasn't that way. The original version didn't say, I want you to set aside reason. I want you to set aside what you're seeing with your own eyes and hearing with your own ears and just believe something even though it doesn't make any sense whatsoever and the evidence doesn't even lead to it. That wasn't the original version. And so if you see life through an academic lens, you don't have to set that aside to be a Jesus follower. The other thing that you might say is, yeah, Eric, okay, I still think maybe it's going to cost me my mind, but it's definitely going to cost me my freedom. And you're right. It will. Following Jesus will cost you something. But think about this. Think about this. No matter what lens you are looking through, no matter what lens you have adopted, you have some oughts and ought nots, don't you? You have some things that you ought to do and others ought to do. And you have some things based on the lens that you look through, you ought not to do and others ought not to do. So you're already saying no to you. I'm just going to ask you, what lens is your no going to be? You're already sacrificing some freedom of oughts and ought nots, no matter what lens you're looking through. So, yes, it will cost you something. But there's peace on the other side. See, this is what's amazing about Christmas, is Christians believe God sent someone to our side of the frame to serve as a point of reference. See, our view is obscured in trying to figure out, what is God like? Is there a God? And if there is a God, I wonder what God is like. I wonder if there is a God. I wonder that if there is a God, what is he like? I wonder if there is a God, what does he think about me? And what are some things that I can expect from him? How does he see things? How does he view things? How does he view the world? How does he think I should behave? How does he think that life should work? And if he has made life to work a certain way, what is that? I wonder those things. And see, Christians believe that God sent Jesus to our side of the frame so that we could have a point of reference, a lens in which to look at everything, the things that help us know what's most important and what's not really important, the way that we should prioritize our life, and the things that the values that we should hold very, very, very close and never let go of. A lens that orients everything. It orders everything in our lives. A point of reference that brings clarity to what God is like. See, so interesting, in the New Testament, we have in our Bible the Old Testament, which is kind of interesting. The Old Testament is actually the Jewish Bible. And if you would talk to a Jew, they would say, it's a little bit offensive, actually, that you call it old, because it's not old to them, it's just their Bible. And then there was New Testament writers that wrote, and then in the 4th century, it was bound together and called the Biblia, the Bible. And it was bound together, so we have the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, and then the New Covenant, the New Testament, bound together. And in the 1st century, these Jesus followers who were Jewish were following Jesus, and they followed Jesus not to believe because, not faith for faith. They believed because of something that they saw with their very own eyes and heard, and they were eyewitnesses to these things, or they were friends of and talked to eyewitnesses, and so these people became Jesus followers when it was very, very difficult to follow Jesus, and it was so hard because they kind of ostracized them. They kind of made it very difficult for them to be in the marketplace, to buy goods, to do things, to even just live. As a Jesus follower, in their culture, they kind of ostracized them off in that Jewish culture. And so it was very difficult. And for some of them, they're thinking, man, I don't know if I can keep following Jesus because this is so, so hard. And so the author of Hebrews comes along and he just says, hey, Jesus is superior to every single thing. Every single thing that the Jewish tradition holds dear, that they think is top shelf, Jesus is superior to all of it. And when you read through the book of Hebrews, that's what you get. One thing after the next thing after the next thing of how Jesus is superior. And his whole thing is, hey, don't lose your faith. Don't walk away. You're focusing on the wrong thing. Your point of reference, the lens in which you're beginning to look through, is the wrong lens, and it's leading you to a place you don't want to go. And so he says in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 14, he says, therefore, since we have a great high priest, so this is, currently, present tense, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. Since we have Jesus, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. Let me tell you what he's not saying. Since you have all the answers to all the questions life has, it's not what he's saying. And that's what we want, isn't it? What he is saying is, since you have Jesus and that point of reference or that lens to look at life through, then hold firmly to the faith that we profess. He goes on later in chapter 12 in verse 1, he says, therefore, since, here we go again, present tense, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Like what? What's he talking about? So back in chapter 11, he goes through this whole list of a whole bunch of people that had lived their lives looking forward to the promise that God was going to bring. And they did phenomenal things, for hundreds of years. In fact, a couple of centuries, these people, all the way from Abraham, all the way down through, and you get to read it in the Jewish Bible, in the Old Testament, you read about these people. And just doing amazing things because God had promised them that God was going to do something in the world for the world. In the world for the world. And they were looking forward to this promise, and all of those people died looking forward to the promise, and many of them were murdered, many of them suffered, some of them were even, if you read in chapter 11, if you're a teenager, you're watching, you're in house, you got to read chapter 11 of Hebrews. You're going to love it. There were some people who were sawed in half. That's a little gory. You should read it for yourself. Unbelievable. Sawed in half, looking forward to the promise. But they never got to see it. And he's telling these people, he's telling these Jewish Jesus followers who were like, man, it's hard. It's hard to follow Jesus. He's like, look, all of these people gave their lives looking forward to the promise. You're on the other side. You got to see Jesus on this side of the frame. Come on, he says. You're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. All of these people that went before you, they're sitting there watching you, cheering you on. In fact, they're here, they're watching, cheering us on as we run our race through this life. And we have the promise. We have the reference point. We have Jesus on this side of the frame that we get to read about and see for ourselves. And so he says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. Let us throw off some of the lenses that we may have been looking through that hinders the way that we're living. It hinders the way that we see. And throw off the sin that so easily entangles us. Why, Paul? Not Paul. We don't know for sure who the author of Hebrews is. Many think that it is Paul. Could be. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. How easy is it to run a race when something is hindering you and you're entangled? Not easy, right? And yet, wouldn't you say, some of you, that's the description of your life? That I have been trying to run my race, but I've been hindered and I've been entangled. could be the lens. It could be the lens in which you're looking at life through. So let us run with perseverance the race that's been marked out for us to run. See, there is a framework that makes the way forward clear. Following Jesus will make your life better because he makes you better at life. He brings clarity around how he's made this world to work. And so, if Jesus is going to be the frame of reference for us, then we should do what the author of Hebrews kind of drills right down onto and saying to these people that were having a rough time and taking their eyes off of Jesus, and he says to them, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Anytime that you are encouraged, persuaded to fix your eyes somewhere else, it will lead you somewhere else. And yet this happens all the time. Fixing our eyes on the pastor, the priest. Some of you hold me in higher regard than you should, because I will let you down. Now, I have a personal assistant now that helps me not let people down as often. But I still will let you down. See, if I am the focus of your eyes are fixed on they're in the wrong place. They're in the wrong place. Fixing our eyes on the church. Some of you, that's why you walked away from faith, isn't it? You had a bad church experience. You're like, man, I'm out. I'm out. Your eyes fixed on the church instead of being fixed on Jesus. Fixing our eyes on circumstances. Some of you, I'm one circumstance away from being out. See, fixing our eyes on experiences. You know, they said if I did this and this and this and prayed this many times and bought this special hanky thing and did that, then it would all work out. And you know what? That's not my experience, so I'm out. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. Fixing our eyes on demonic spirits. I talk to some Jesus followers that I get a little concerned because it's like every conversation I have with them is about spiritual warfare. And it's like, man, I mean, your eyes are so fixed on that I'm beginning to think that is in a position, it's taken a position for you it shouldn't take. Because the one that is in me is greater than he who is in the world. So my eyes are fixed there. See, we take our eyes and we start looking through other lenses that we shouldn't be looking through. He goes on, and let us run with perseverance. Here's the whole verse. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, the author of faith, and the one who landed the plane. The perfecter of faith. See, Christianity, it rests upon one person. Not an organization. It didn't begin with an organization. It didn't even begin with the Bible. There was no Bible. There was the Jewish scripture scrolls, but there was no New Testament. When Christianity began, it didn't begin with that. It didn't begin with an organization. It didn't begin with an experience. It didn't begin with a building, and it certainly didn't begin with your coworker. You know what? I work with someone who's a Christian, and that's why I'm not one. It certainly didn't begin there. See, Christianity, it rests upon one person. That's why it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart when someone walks away from faith, and they walk away from faith not because of Jesus. I have never, ever heard of one person walking away from faith because of Jesus. Never heard it. And yet, that's the one person it all rests on. See, it begins and ends with the person of Jesus. So if you're thinking about walking away or you have never, stepped over the line of faith, and the reasons for that is tied to something that doesn't have anything to do with Jesus, I would just encourage you to reconsider. He goes on, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, something that we have never seen a body rotting and a corpse rotting on a cross, because they typically did not take them down. They just let the bodies rot. We don't smell it. We don't see it. We don't really we can't understand what enduring the cross even means. Scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him. Crossing. Those of you watching online, those of you who have maybe never viewed Christianity this way, never viewed Jesus as coming to our side of the frame, would you consider him? Would you consider him, not them? Not your coworkers, not your neighbors, not the extended family that say they believe one thing and they live a different way. Would you consider him? Maybe not them. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. See, circumstantial or experience-based faith, it won't survive the pleasures and pressures of this life, because the pleasures and pressures of this life will eventually make faith inconvenient and eventually implausible. See, it can't just be, my faith is based on my circumstances and my experiences. See, if at some point your frame of reference didn't make sense and you wandered, maybe you had a childlike faith, but it didn't work in an adult world. It didn't make sense and you wandered. What was the faith you lost fixed or fastened to? Was it fastened to Jesus? Did you feel like you had to abandon your mind or abandon thinking and to think that, gosh, I don't have to actually abandon evidence and intellectual things and scientific things to still keep Jesus front and center in the frame of reference for me? Crossing, I hope during this Christmas season, no matter where you're at, some of you, Christmas time is a hard time because there's, family issues and relational issues and, loss and it's hard. But I hope that won't be where you will fix your eyes. That won't be the lens in which you go through Christmas with, but you would fix your eyes on the one that God put on our side of the frame. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the ability to have fun together with our spiritual family. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for sending him to our side of the frame so that we could see, that we could have clarity to know what God is like. God, I just pray that as we go through this season, that you would do an incredible thing in people's hearts. Encourage them. Help them to consider you, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So Crossing, if you are wondering what each one of these...
Well, hey, welcome.
Welcome.
Glad you could join us.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
All right. Again, thank you for joining us this morning. We would just like to, chat a little bit about what we heard, what we're thinking. I'm not really sure. What do you wonder, Jim?
Well, I was wondering what you were going to ask me.
Yeah,
I was
okay.
thinking about that the whole time. But as a man, you wonder if you have what it takes to be a good son, a husband that is worth loving, a father worth following. So, you get through all of that, and that's some of the things that I wonder. But as we look through it through the lens, I wonder, why do some people come to this side of the lens to Jesus and why other people don't? And that's what gets me stuck sometimes. I don't know, does that bother you?
Right. Yes. Oh, I can see that. What is it that draws people in, and what is it that pushes people away? I'm hopeful that through this series we'll be able to clarify some of those wonderings. Maybe brush off or clean off some of those lenses. I don't know. We'll see. The thought of Jesus coming to this side of the lens, being present. When Eric was talking in Hebrews, the author of Hebrews is saying, since you have this, since you have Jesus, the author and perfecter, we, however, are almost again on that other side where I guess you'd say the Old Testament people were. They were hopeful of Christ coming. Those first century Christians had Christ. He was there. They were able to see him and walk with him and be with him. We are again sort of clouded. Our lenses are kind of, we're back on the other side. We are awaiting more of his return. Right. So I think we are wondering, is that real? Is that going to happen? What does that look like?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I just think some of the things that he even just shared as far as what entangles us. We've been on the journey for a long time, and still what takes my eyes off of a focus of Jesus and what takes yours. Mm-hmm. I know what it is for me, and I know you spend a lot of time trying to get clarity. I've always admired that about you, that you've always gone to the utmost depths to figure things out, and that's what we're supposed to do. But what takes your eyes off of following Christ? How easily do you get distracted?
Oh, I tell you what. You can get distracted fairly easily. You've got life circumstances. You have it's Christmas.
Yeah.
So we've got to make sure we get all of these things in a row. We've got to get sure all the gifts are ordered so they can get shipped off or whatever. We've got all of just how is it all going to happen? I mean, there's just life things that happen and come up and cloud and go, what is going to happen? I read something yesterday where it said, when you feel like you're hanging by a thread, make sure the thread's attached to the hem of his garment.
Ooh, yeah, that's
and
good.
I sent that to some friends of mine, and I'm like, I think I need this because I there have been times recently. It's like, yes, I'm just hanging by a thread, but as I think is like, oh, where was that thread attached? Yeah. If I could just attach it there to Christ's garment, he will get me through.
Yeah. And I think solitude with Jesus is great. But having a support group, a lot of times it is the church that people leave because of something that happened in the church. But my experiences have always been church family, my family. I don't know how people go through life with having a support group that brings clarity. Pastor Eric and I have had a relationship for the last 15 years and back and forth and accountable and this and that. And that brings clarity back around, and hopefully, I can do that for him as well, and we can do that for you as well out there.
That's right. All right, Crossing, thank you for joining us, and we will see you back here again next week.